A true prophet of God does not seek luxury, glamour, or self-display. He reminds people of the fleeting nature of this world, and he lives that message himself. Yet simplicity is not the same as neglect. Prophet Muhammad was never disheveled or careless. Through his own example, he taught the importance of cleanliness, personal hygiene, and a dignified, tidy appearance, even using a simple bucket of water as a mirror. And here is something most people have never heard. Even Western historians, often writing with no religious motive, repeatedly described him as meticulously clean, well-groomed, fragrant, and attentive to every detail of hygiene. Stay tuned. You're about to hear surprising descriptions you've likely never encountered before.
Before going to bed, he cleaned his teeth with a particular kind of wood. He slept upon a carpet or a mattress of leather, stuffed with fibers of the palm tree, which he shook very thoroughly in order to drive out the vermin, for Mahomet was meticulously clean. Émile Dermangeum, French orientalist and historian.
His teeth, upon which he bestowed great care, were well set, dazzling white. Emanuel Deutsch, German Jewish scholar of Semitic and Middle Eastern studies.
Aisha, a wife of his, tells us that Mahomet never lay down, by night or by day, but on waking he applied the toothpick to his teeth before he performed ablution. The toothpick was always placed conveniently for him at night, so that when he got up in the night to pray, he might use it before his lustrations. He never travelled without one. William Muir, Scottish orientalist, Christian missionary, and principal of the University of Edinburgh.
Note: Muir's translation of the original Arabic word miswak as toothpick is not entirely accurate. A few inches long thin twig with one end chewed into bristle-like fibers, it would be more appropriate to refer to it as a small toothbrush rather than a toothpick. His teeth, which looked as if they were hailstones. Bosworth Smith, British orientalist who taught at Trinity College, University of Oxford.
Scrupulously neat in his personal habits and ever ready to condemn untidiness, yellow teeth in particular, in his companions. When he donned freshly laundered clothes, he was accustomed to remark, "Praise be to the Lord, who hath clothed me with that which shall hide my nakedness and adorn me while I live." R.F. Dibble, American orientalist and a professor of English at Columbia University.
When sovereign, he found fault with those whose hair was untidy, or whose clothes were dirty, being himself particular as to his appearance. He disliked yellow teeth, and almost made the use of the toothpick a religious ordinance. D.S. Margoliouth, British orientalist, and professor of Arabic at Oxford University.
Note: the expression "found fault with" does not quite represent the gentle demeanor of the prophet, who did not have a critical personality and often preferred silence over criticism. If he was displeased with something, his companions would typically notice it in his expression rather than hearing it in his words.
He used to wash his pure hands, both before and after meals, and then stroked his blessed face and arms, saying, "The blessing of a meal consists in the washing of the hands before and after it." S. W. Kohler, German missionary, and an expert in African languages.
He was fond of ablutions, and fonder still of perfumes, and he prided himself on the neatness of his hair and the pearly whiteness of his teeth. R. Bosworth Smith.
Frequent ablutions, prescribed in Islam, are essential to the health and grateful to the senses of men in the heat of an oriental clime, and to the mind of an Asiatic. External purification presents a lively image of the internal purity of the heart. The cleansing of the body is pronounced by Muhammad to be the key of prayer, without which it cannot be acceptable to God. Charles Mills, English historian and orientalist.
He combed his beard with care. He used for a glass or mirror a bucket full of water, in which he used to look to adjust decently the folds of his turban. Alphonse de Lamartine, French author, poet, and statesman.
Mahomet was meticulously clean. Emile Durkheim.
Scrupulously neat in his personal habits. R.F. Dibble.
He was scrupulous as to personal cleanliness and observed frequent ablutions. Washington Irving, American short story writer, essayist, biographer, historian, and diplomat.
Scrupulous care was bestowed by him on his person. D.S. Margoliouth.
Cleanliness of body, which he made in his Quran the image of purity of soul, was his sole delicacy. Alphonse de Lamartine.
From these accounts, a clear picture emerges. The Prophet Muhammad lived with simplicity, yet carried himself with remarkable cleanliness, dignity, and refinement. His personal habits were not mere routine. They were part of the example he set for all mankind. Purity of body, reflecting purity of soul. Thank you for watching.